So good morning. I am Andy Costello. I'm a commercial real estate broker based here in Vancouver, Washington, licensed in both Oregon and Washington. I have been investing in real estate since 2011, before I even got into the industry as a real estate broker. And I got into the business after 15 years in local government, my last job as a city manager. Last year, my business partner and I sold or leased over 500,000 square feet of commercial real estate. So that's something like 7 football fields. So we had a good year last year, on track to get close to that this year. And so hopefully that tells you a little bit about me. I am not obviously a CPA or an attorney, so I'm not giving you advice. I'm just giving you some guidance on what the process looks like if you're looking to lease space for the first time, going through a lease renewal, or if you're looking to expand or open a second location. And then obviously I am recording today's event. So if you are not able to stay the whole time, I will email out the link to the video so you can watch it or rewatch it after today's class if you missed something. We, in our 30 minutes together, are going to talk about basic lease types, some language that you might see in some leases that might be some different acronyms you might not be familiar with, some of the challenges that tenants run into, then what the process looks like, and then about 5 minutes usually at the end for some Q&A. So for those of you, if you don't mind putting in the chat whether this is going to be a first lease for you, or maybe a second one because you're expanding your business, or maybe you're shrinking your footprint. You're looking to downsize into a smaller location, or maybe you're going through a first lease renewal, or starting that process with your current landlord, or some other situation. If you could just put the letter in the chat so I know kind of who is here and what you are looking to do. Okay, so we've got some first timers here. All right, thanks Rebecca and Nicole. Okay, appreciate it. And then just trying to learn a little bit more about the industry. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you guys for participating. I appreciate your engagement, just so I know kind of what the audience is and what your experience level is like. So there are 3 basic types of lease structure. There's a full service lease, a modified gross lease, and a triple net lease. And so we'll talk about a little bit, each of those a little bit. So a full service lease is most common in office spaces where you pay a base rent, and that rent includes everything. So it'll include janitorial cleaning for the common areas. If you have common restrooms, it'll include that. It includes the lighting in the parking lot and those electric bills, the landscaping, maintenance. It includes everything. So you pay one price and the whole kit and caboodle is in there. So as a tenant, you don't really have to worry about anything other than maybe some janitorial in your own office, but that might be included in the lease. The landlord might do some basic janitorial service, empty your trash and vacuum your own office. But it includes pretty much everything except for maybe like your personal internet for your business, and some, you want water service or something like that. But so that's the easiest lease structure to understand because pretty much everything's included in it. You don't have to think too much about what other costs might be associated with your lease. The second type of lease structure that we see in the business is called a modified gross lease. This is when a tenant pays their rent, and then you might be paying some of the utilities. So let's say the building is separately metered for water. So you might pay for water, but there's only one electric meter, so that's included in your rent. Every modified gross lease can be different. So there's not one hard and fast rule to what that looks like, but you just kind of have the base rent, and then you kind of understand what you might be paying in addition to that. And then one of the most common lease structures for like a retail type of space is a triple net lease. So this is when you're going to pay a base lease rent, your base amount, and then you are going to pay your prorated share of all the property expenses. So these are expenses that you don't have control over. The landlord is the one maybe taking care of that. Landscaping, when they're resurfacing the parking lot, putting on a new roof, that you as a tenant are going to pay a proportionate share of those depending on how much space you occupy in the building. So let's say you are a retail shop and you are 25% of the space in that center, you're going to pay 25% of those expenses to operate and keep that shopping center looking nice and well maintained. So when we talk about triple nets, you might be wondering, well, what are these other expenses that I might be paying? So they include the property taxes, again, your proportionate share of the taxes that the landlord's paying. the insurance on that building, and then the common area maintenance. And so I've talked a little bit about what that common area maintenance is, but you might be wondering, well, geez, what else am I paying for? So the landlord might be charging you a percentage for the management fees if they have a management company, the repairs and maintenance, the landscaping on the outside of the building, and again, the janitorial of the common areas. Typically there's no, in a triple net lease, they're not coming in to clean your office or anything like that. And then the utilities. So the utilities, again, for the street, the lights out in the parking lot, if there's irrigation, that irrigation water that's on the landscaping. So these are things that you would be paying your proportionate share for as a tenant in a triple net lease. Again, if there's snow and ice removal, window washing, anything that's going to be going on to the benefit of that complex or that building, you're going to be paying, again, a proportionate share of those expenses. And so a lot of times people don't understand, you know, those triple nets can almost sometimes be half of what your base lease rent is, again, depending on how the building is maintained. So you want to make sure you understand those costs, because you might think, oh, wow, this lease is only $2,500 a month. And then you don't realize that it's really much more expensive than that because of the triple nets in that cost. Another language term that we use in commercial leasing is TIs. They stand for tenant improvements. So oftentimes you might be looking to lease a space and it's not suited for what you want to do. Maybe there's too many walls, not enough walls. It maybe doesn't have a bathroom in it because it's a brand new building and there's only a floor drain and maybe some plumbing that's run under the concrete, but no restroom. So how are you going to pay for that? Oftentimes, you know, it depends on the because everything is, every lease is different, every business is different, their credit, their finances. I can never tell somebody that a lease is always this way, but sometimes you can negotiate with the landlord on some tenant improvements, and the landlord may contribute to the cost of doing some things to the space. And I say may because, again, it depends on a lot of factors whether the landlord is willing to do that. And if they are willing to do that, they're going to certainly look at whether you're credit worthy. Do you have money in the bank to contribute? Because most of the time, if a landlord's going to contribute to tenant improvements, they are going to do a reimbursement. So they're going to make sure you do the work, and then they're going to want a copy of, you know, the fact that you paid those bills and then reimburse you. So you as the tenant still need to have the money up front to do what you want to do to the property. And so that is, you know, when you see a business going into a new space and maybe it's under construction for 3 or 4 months, you know, there obviously is expense associated with that. And so sometimes the landlord might help you with that. When you have a triple net lease, when we talked about all of those other expenses, you want to make sure that there's some language in your lease that you can audit or take a look at what those expenses are. Now, you don't really have the ability to go to a landlord and be like, hey, I could have gotten that roof done cheaper for $2,000. I really don't want to pay your expenses. But, you know, I think looking at what the landlord's spending money on, you know, makes you just a more informed tenant. So, you know, make sure that your lease does have some language in there that you can see where they're spending their money, what their management fee is, that they're paying a company to take care of the building that you're operating out of. Another thing that confuses people sometimes is when you look at your lease, it's rentable square footage versus usable square footage, and they're not always the same. So you want to make sure that you understand that what you're renting is sometimes, most often, a larger square footage than your actual usable square footage, because that rentable square footage, if you're in a full service lease, will include a percentage for the common areas. It may, you know, when they take the measurements, it's from exterior wall to exterior wall. So you are paying for square footage for space that you cannot actually use in your business. So just make sure you understand what that means. And then the commencement date. So that's the date your lease is going to begin, but that's not always your move-in date, because again, if you have tenant improvements, it may take, depending on what you're doing to the space, months until that space is actually ready for you to occupy. So you just want to make sure that you understand that during that time, you may or may not be paying rent for space that, again, you're not occupying or able to do anything with, because the space is getting ready for your use. So some things that sometimes get businesses into trouble is that if you're working with a broker and they don't know whether your usage is allowed in the zoning. So I had met with a client yesterday that has a health and wellness business. And so one of the things I told them that I would look into is they're really interested in a retail space, but perhaps they might fit into a medical office space use. And so I told them that I would do some research and make sure that that's something that's another option for them, because I would hate for them to sign a lease and then find out that their business is not allowed in an office space zoning and they need to be in a retail space. So you want to make sure that what you're doing is allowed in the space that you are renting. And whether you're looking into that or you're asking your broker to look into that, you want to make sure that you don't find yourself in a pickle in a space that's not zoned for what your use is, and a government agency comes and shuts you down because you can't operate in that location. And then not understanding what your business needs. So, I know none of us have crystal balls, but, hopefully as a business owner, you're doing projections of what your business is and where you're going and what you want to do. And so that you're not signing a 5-year lease and then you're double, triple your growth. And then that space is no longer, good for you because, spaces can sit on the market, even if you have the ability to sublease a space, that you still are responsible for that lease space, even if it's not working for you and your business. One thing that people really don't understand is when it comes to finding a location and signing a lease is that it takes time. The fastest I've ever gotten somebody into a space is 30 days. And that's because their business partnership was dissolving and they were in a hurry and they were not particular about where they could relocate to. Finding space takes time. Commercial brokers, just the movement is much slower in the sense of urgency when I work with my colleagues. They don't work weekends. They typically don't work nights. So, we're limited to a schedule of, trying to tour things, trying to get a lease copy, a draft of a lease to review, those negotiations. If you have to do any tenant improvements, if you need engineered drawings, you need to go pull permits, then you've got to get a commercial contractor out there and then obviously get your stuff moved in, get set up, and get that all going. All of that takes time. And so make sure that you are allowing enough time for your business that if you are looking for something almost 6 months out, isn't too soon to start looking, especially if your requirements are very narrow. If you tell me, Andy, I only want to be in Salmon Creek and I only want to lease 3,000 to 3,500 square feet, your parameters are really narrow and I need a lot of lead time because now we've got to wait for that product to hit the market. And so there's just not, sometimes I tell my clients, drive around, you're asking me for a product that doesn't exist in that area. And so, when you're trying to figure out where you want to be, the wider your parameters are, the better that we can help you and find something for you. And then when it comes to your renewal, so let's say you've signed a 5-year lease, you want to make sure that you, if you're going to stay in that location, that you understand what that renewal timing is. Sometimes you have to give your current landlord 6 months if you're going to notice that you're going to stay, or 6 months notice that you're going to vacate. So you just want to make sure you understand what those calendars are because these lead times can be very, very long. And then, of course, money. Everything costs more than you think it should and takes longer than you think it should. So whether you're looking at moving costs, ongoing, expenses of this new location, and then those tenant improvements. I have a client just signed a lease. Their down payment on moving into a space was $20,000, and it's going to cost them about that much to move into the space. So it's and they're not even doing tenant improvements. They're just moving all of their equipment from one location to another location. So it can be very expensive. And so I just always want to make sure that people have enough money in the bank. They know what they're getting themselves into because, you can't get into a commercial space really with not a whole lot of money in the bank because it can be an expensive proposition. So when you're thinking about, especially for the first time people looking into getting a lease space, these are some things that I encourage you to think about. Who has leverage in the market? So unfortunately, I almost don't think it matters what type of real estate market we're in. When it comes to leasing space, landlords generally hold all the cards. They own the buildings. They can dictate who can go in there. I mean, I have people say, Andy, I want to be in that space. I'm like, well, the landlord doesn't want your use. Even if it's allowed by zoning, they might not want your business type in there. They might not want the number of vehicles or the traffic or whatever their reason is. So you have to understand who has leverage when it comes to negotiation. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's not the tenant. They have more money and they can outweigh you. And that's why you see sometimes spaces that are sitting vacant for years. Maybe they have vacancy insurance, so they're not really losing any money. So you just need to understand when you go into these negotiations, you have some leverage, but really the landlords kind of hold all the cards. And then again, what is your time frame? You almost can't have enough time in this process when you're looking for space, the narrower your requirements are. So make sure that you understand what your time frame is in terms of trying to find a space. And then you want to make sure that, again, I talked about if you're going to expand in your business plan and your growth happens so fast, or even if there's a change in the market in your industry and you have to shrink your space, can you sublease your space? Because you want to make sure that if you need to get out of that lease or find somebody to take over that lease and help with take over those payments and the responsibility, that you want to make sure you have the authority and the ability to work with the landlord to do that. Now, it's oftentimes not as easy as people think to sublease space. I've had several clients that want to sublease, and I tell them the average time that stuff's going to sit on the market for us to sublease is a year. So you are going to be responsible for those triple net payments maybe, and those lease payments until you can find somebody else in there, even if the space doesn't work for you anymore. So you just want to make sure you understand what those financial ramifications and that timing is. And then you want to make sure you actually read the lease. Part of what I do for my clients is I read a lot of leases and I give clients notes in the margins. I say, hey, make sure you understand you're responsible for the HVAC. Hey, make sure that you're going to be responsible for this in the lease. Again, I'm not an attorney, but I do see a lot of leases. So you've got to make sure that you understand what you're signing. Every lease is different. There are standard forms in our industry, but it doesn't mean that landlords use them. Sometimes they have their own attorneys draw up paperwork, and it's a lease language and form I've never seen because they hired an attorney to do it. When you sign a lease, though, unless you're Nike or Amazon, you as the tenant are signing a personal guarantee. There's no way around that. When you sign something, you are on the hook. Just like if you sign off to lease an apartment, not apartment building, lease an apartment unit, you are on the hook for your lease. There is no getting out of signing, lease payments, no matter what happens to your business. So you want to make sure you understand the financial commitment that you are taking on for the length of the lease. And then you want to understand what that billing process is for triple nets. Oftentimes, you might be making quarterly payments or monthly payments on those triple nets. And if you're making, the landlord's projecting what they're going to spend in that year, if they go over or under, the next year, they're either going to, credit your account. Of course, you're not going to get that money back, or you're going to owe them money. And you want to make sure that you understand what that process is. So you have some money in savings that if you have to come up with some extra money because they didn't budget or, some unexpected expense happened to the building, that they will be asking you for the money. And then when you negotiate with a landlord, trying to figure out what they want. And that can be difficult because sometimes landlords really, again, maybe they inherited the building. I see this a lot. So they, the building's already paid for, it's the kids running the building, and there's just not really a sense of urgency. So, unfortunately, when it comes to tenant negotiations, there really just isn't a whole lot of leverage that oftentimes tenants have, especially in markets that we're seeing now. Now, unless you want to move to downtown Portland, where a lot of businesses are trying to get out of downtown Portland, yeah, you want to lease 10,000 square feet of office, you have some leverage there. But by and large, when you're looking at very active markets where people want to be, unfortunately, just as a tenant, you just don't have a whole lot of leverage. So I know a lot of you are first time looking to lease. If you don't mind putting in the chat, what kind of space are you looking for? Are you looking for a retail space? You looking maybe for a restaurant, office, some type of industrial space, or something totally not even related to any of those categories? If you could put that in the chat, that would be helpful. Again, just so we can talk a little bit more detail about what type of lease types are generally for those spaces. So, okay, so we've got lots of office and a little bit of retail, industrial. Okay. All right, thank you. Again, I appreciate your participation. So, bottom line, oftentimes people want to know, Andy, how much is the space going to cost me? I just want to know, because again, we use a lot of language that can be very confusing to people. So oftentimes we list, 90% of the time brokers list their rates based on square foot, cost per square foot per year. And then if it's a triple net, it'll say NNN. So when I look at this $20/NNN, that means it is listed as $20 a square foot a year plus triple nets. Now, oftentimes, if you're looking on LoopNet, and even what I can see, I don't know what those triple nets are. I usually have to call and get the information. So let's say you're looking to lease 1,200 square feet. This is how we're going to do the calculation. I'm going to take that $20 a square feet. I'm going to times it by the space size you want, which is 1,200 square feet. You're going to be paying base $24,000 in your first year, because every lease always has an automatic increase of 3 to 4%, which we're starting to see with inflation going up. So then I'm going to take that $24,000 a year. I'm going to divide that by 12 for your monthly rate. So your base rent is $2,000 a month for your first year. Now we're going to find out what those triple nets are. So then I find out that those triple nets are $2.50 a square foot. I'm going to times that by the size of space you're telling me you want to lease, 1,200 square feet. That's $3,000 a year you're going to be paying in triple nets. Again, then I'm going to divide that by 12. That gets me at $250 a month for your triple nets. So your base, what I call base rent, because that's how typically we all think of what's my monthly cost. I don't need to know all these added fees, just what's my monthly cost. For a space like that, you're going to be paying $2,250 a month in your first year. Now, again, Remember, triple nets are budgeted, they're estimated until the landlord does a reconciliation. So you might get some of that back, you might owe some more, but then in your next year, I guarantee you your base lease rent is going to go up because that's just how leases are written. So I send over the lease to you and you want to know whether you should just sign the lease as is. And I tell people you really need to make sure that you understand what you're reading. So I recently had a tenant, we were reading the lease, and again, I don't always know because every lease is different. And in the lease, I noticed that the tenant is responsible for the HVAC and the roof. So the tenant comes, my client comes back to me and says, hey, I need more information on the roof. I don't want to be responsible for this roof. I don't know how old it is. I don't know if it's been maintained. I don't know if it leaks. And so we went back to the, I went back to the other broker and I said, we need more information on this roof, or can you take this part out? Boom. In like 5 minutes, he responded. He's like, fine, we'll take it out. The tenant doesn't have to be responsible for the roof. So this is why you have to read the lease. You need to understand what you're signing, and a good broker should be advising you of that, right? This is why I feel like it's my job to tell my clients what you're on the hook for, because, you know, hey, we were able to negotiate an expense that now he doesn't have to be responsible for, which is great because he doesn't want to be responsible for the roof. It's not his building. I talked a little bit about a personal guarantee and what that is. Again, you need to understand that you are personally responsible for what you are signing. You know, the landlords can go after you if your business folds for that money because you made a commitment to make those payments for that time in that lease. So I just want to be sure that you understand that when you're signing something, there is no, I'm going to put it in my LLC, I'm going to put it in my corporation, I'm going to do something else. Yeah, those things can be listed on the lease or LLC, but at the end of the day, you're signing a personal guarantee that you are responsible for those lease payments. And I never can stress that enough because I will talk a little bit about, you know, when you get into a first lease, you might have some experience with landlord tenant law. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So I've dealt with some shady, well, what I perceive as shady landlords. And so I tell people, if you don't like how the negotiation process is going, I would tell you, do not lease space there. If you don't like how they're responding, you feel like you're getting taken advantage of, we'll go find something else. You know, just like any other industry, there's good people to work with and bad people to work with. I don't know, bad is not really the right word, but, you know, some people that maybe aren't, you know, the people you want to do business with. You want to find your people. So, you know, if you're just not getting good vibes, they're not negotiating with you, they're not trying to work with you during the process, then maybe they are not your landlord. So you should look for something else. So several of you have said you are looking for office space. We've got a retail person that mentioned and some industrial. So you might be wondering what kind of things businesses are going to be triple nets. So typically, if you're looking at leasing retail space, industrial space, those types of leases are typically triple net leases. When it comes to leasing office space, you're typically on the modified gross, which means you're going to pay for some expenses associated with the building, or full service, where you'll just have a flat lease rate. So those are kind of the industries where you might be having those extra triple net expenses in addition to your base rent. Landlord tenant, I alluded to this a little earlier. So if you've ever rented an apartment or rented a house in Washington and Oregon, Pacific, you know, on the West Coast, we have very strong tenant laws, the landlord tenant laws, where the landlords have very limited abilities. There are no landlord tenant laws when it comes to commercial. So, you know, unfortunately, when COVID happened, you know, and businesses were looking for some reprieve from their landlords, you know, there was no landlord tenant law that they could fall back on. And, you know, some of those businesses got PPP loans and some other things and were able to figure it out, or their landlords were able to work with them. But you just got to understand that you really have no rights as a tenant in a space when it comes to commercial. So you can't compare the two or use any leverage in any of those laws that are written for residential. So I've now thoroughly confused you. You're not sure what to do. You don't know what the next steps are. So where do you go from here? I tell people, look at your budget. What's your profit and loss? What are your cash flow projections? Can you afford having space? Because it is an added expense, right? And you're taking that debt on for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever your lease might be. So you just want to make sure that you understand. Think about the type of property you want, the location, the size, what your business growth plans are. You know, if you plan on adding to your team, what do you want to do? So think a little bit about that. And then whether it's me or somebody else, contact a commercial broker. It doesn't cost you anymore. 99% of the time, I'm compensated by the landlord. I've had a couple of tenants where I upfront said, hey, I don't get compensated by the landlord. If you want me to help you, you have to pay me directly. But most of the time I am compensated by the landlord. So, you know, if you contact somebody on a sign on a property, that broker works for the landlord. That is who they have an agreement with. Now they certainly can help facilitate, but they're not necessarily, they're not negotiating on your behalf. They're negotiating on the landlord's behalf. So, you know, make sure that you are working with somebody that's representing you. And then you have that conversation about what's your budget? What do you need? What kind of space are you looking for? And then once you find that space, the next step is the commercial broker prepares a letter of intent for you as the prospective tenant. This is a non-binding letter that you send over to the landlord saying, this is what we'd like to see in the lease. This is our term. This is our rates. This is, you know, we're asking for some tenant improvement money. And so make sure that you, you know, it's outlining what you want to see in a lease. And then that's kind of our negotiating tool. When that comes back, then, you know, once the lease is finalized or we get the lease, a broker should review that for you, tell you what you might be signing. Maybe you have a lawyer look at it. Then when you're good with that, you sign the lease and then you take occupancy, you get the keys, you do your next steps with what you need to do with the space. So with that, that was a large mouthful of a lot of information for you. I'm happy to stay on for questions. This is my contact information. If you don't feel comfortable reaching out, you know, either putting your question in the chat or, you know, feel free to text, call me, email me. I'm happy to have additional conversations with folks. I really appreciate your time. And I know I talk fast. There's a lot of information when it comes to leasing, especially because if you've never done it before, it's a really different process than maybe something else you've done in your business. So if somebody is asking about loans, I think you're asking about loans. So you can, I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but in some cases you can finance tenant improvements. But when it comes to other types of loans, and I'm not really sure what the question is when it comes to a loan. So you can finance some of your tenant improvements, but when it comes to maybe your lease rate, if that's your question, I'm not sure if you can clarify that. I know that there is a commercial lender on our call right now. If you can clarify your question there, that might be helpful. But let's see, Susie, if you have commercial lender. Oh, okay, there is a commercial lender on the call bar if you want to put your contact information in the chat. But it again depends on what type of loan. I certainly have oodles of commercial lenders in my pocket, and I usually suggest that you talk to a couple of lenders, because if BAR is not able to lend on something, maybe another bank will. Kind of a secret thing about the commercial lending industry is, you know, every quarter banks are recalibrating what types of things they want in their portfolio. And so, you know, whether you're trying to buy a building, you might go talk to a lender this quarter and they say no. And then you talk to them next quarter and they might say yes, because now they want that asset class in their portfolio. But that's a whole other thing. And I do teach a commercial purchasing 101 class that I will be offering next month. If you're interested in purchasing commercial real estate, that's a separate conversation that I teach a class on that too. So thanks, Bar, for putting your information in the chat. Susie, hopefully that's helpful for you. Yes, we certainly can chat, Susie. And so, yeah, if you have questions, if you don't have any questions, you feel like you got, like I said, I will email out a video with everything that I talked about today. And again, please, April, you want to know about the commercial buying. I haven't posted it yet, but I will post that on social media. I wanted to get through this class, and then I will post for next month's class. Every quarter, first month of the quarter, I teach commercial leasing 101, and then the second month of the quarter, I teach commercial buying 101. I'm trying to figure out a third class that I'm going to start offering, but yes, I will make sure that I can send out that information for you folks. Oh, April, you're too sweet. I did not pay her to say that, folks. Yeah, I love teaching. There's a lot to this industry that I think remains a mystery, that I try to just debunk the mystery. So I want people to feel like they understand what's going on in the business. So, but yeah, I'm happy to stay on here. We're right at 9:30. I promised I'd end it on time. So if you don't have any questions, feel free to log off. Again, thank you for being here. I appreciate your time.